I think there's enough of us here, so I'd like. We're 1 minute late. We need to keep on schedule, and I'm sure Scott and Pete will appreciate if we get out of here on time.
Our time is your time.
So I'd like to call to order the Public Health and Community Service Committee meeting on September 28th, 2023. Kathy, could I get a roll call, please?
Hendricks. Ness. Shorten.
Here.
Van Hoff.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
Altoff.
Here.
Von Bergen.
Here. So could I get
I'll make a motion to approve
all right.
minutes as presented.
Thank you, Ms. Altoff, seconded by Ms. Van Hoff. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those against? Motion carried. Okay, do we have public comments? None. Okay, then we'll move on to member comments. Any member comments today? None. Wow. Okay.
Good meeting last night at McCall. So, thank you guys.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Seeing no new business, we will move on to the routine consent agenda. Are there any items anybody would like removed for discussion?
I'll make a motion to approve the routine consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Wagner. Could I get a roll call, please?
Wagner.
Yes.
Shorten.
Yes.
Van Hoff.
Yes.
Altoff.
Yes.
Von Bergen.
Yes. Wonderful. Moving right along, seeing no business, then we will move on to presentations and the workforce housing. Thank you, Hans. I appreciate you coming in and presenting this. You know, at CDHG, we had a presentation from North Point on the Taylor Place project that we funded with the ARPA funds. And, you know, I remember that discussion and improving those. And, you know, there was a lot of discussion on cost. And it's really kind of confusing when it comes down to it. So after our discussion after that with Faith, you know, I did think it was a good idea for us to understand that a little better as to why things are put together the way they are.
I'll chime in too and say that even the conversation at the county board level, when you're talking about using ARPA money to fund affordable housing projects, you know, the conversation about if you do it this way, it's less cost per square footage, and if you do it this way, if individuals go out for affordable housing grants to provide that product to us, the whole funding mechanism is so convoluted that you can't do that. You can't make those comparisons because they don't work. So I agree, thank you. I think it's really important that we all understand exactly how that works at all those levels so that developers even are interested in providing affordable housing or workforce housing units. So, thank you.
Yep, and so good morning, everyone. For the record, Hans Mott, Community Development Administrator, and I will make this quick because I know there's another meeting that's subsequent to this one at 10. So I didn't expect to be here so early, but that's good. I'm glad I am.
We're efficient.
Yes.
Thank you. And I did want to kind of just piggyback onto your comment, is that in order to have the housing at the lower rates, so the 30% of area median income or 50%, they need long-term investments into these properties, and you'll kind of see that when we get to the slide about tax credits. And so that's one of the things I just wanted to point out right off the bat is not only do you have the high construction costs now, but that long-term affordability is what you're really looking at. So with that being said, I'll just jump right into it. All right, and so here's the variety of tools that I have seen used or that can be used within some affordable or workforce housing developments. And so I'm going to go over each one of these as we go through the process here, and want to point out first and foremost that we work with the top three in our office, as well as the Treasury Housing Funds. And then the other programs are usually typically state or like ComEd course, it'd be Commonwealth Edison. The housing trust funds and things like that, vouchers or other organizations. So the Community Development Block Grant Program is an entitlement that we receive on an annual basis by creating an annual action plan. And it's for a county over 200,000 in population or a city over 50,000. The law was written to allow the funds to act as local funds. So it could be used as match for many other federal programs, and that's pretty unusual, but actually very helpful. So with the pro-housing or YIMBY that we've been working with, that you'll hear about if you're on PED next week, because we just got some paperwork back from them. You'll hear a little bit about the leverage of CDBG being part of that over a long time frame. But CDBG is typically used in these sort of developments for site clearance, acquisition, and utility installation. It can be used for construction, but it's not, the program really isn't designed for that unless you have very specific, what they call a community development housing organization, or CBDOs, community-based development organization, would be the type of setup that you need to have in order to do that. So those are pretty uncommon. Section 108 is part of CDBG as well, and that's a loan against 5 years of CDBG. So for us, that would be about a $7 million thing if that was something that we wanted to pursue at a later time. Income limit on this program is 80% of area median, and it could be a grant, a forgivable loan, or a loan, like a general loan. We've typically operated under the grant as for CDBG since our inception.
When you say you want to pursue the Section 108, what does that mean?
So we have it in our plan. We have no project to pursue at this time, but it's an option.
It's an option if the right project comes forward.
Correct, okay. And that could be economic development as well as other projects.
So Hans, would that be additional funding that we would request, or would that be taking the funding we have now and putting it all toward the housing?
It's additional funding in the form of a loan,
Okay.
And it could be up to a 20-year term.
Okay.
All right, the home program came out a bit later than CDBG, about 20 years later, and it's specifically for the maintenance or development of affordable housing. Can be used for construction, so there's not that limitation that you have with CDBG where you got to have specific organizations doing that. So it could be nonprofits, et cetera. They do have what's called a community housing development organization set aside. That's 15% of the fund. That's something that's subject to a lot of debate about making that a nonprofit set aside. It has not happened in Congress yet. Commonly, it's a 60% limit for rentals. If you're looking at workforce housing, 1 out of 10 can be 80%. It could be a forgivable mortgage, and if it's construction, which usually is what it's used for workforce housing, it's 20 years of period of affordability. It could be done as a loan, so that means that they would pay it back rather than it being forgiven at that 20-year mark. And the subsidy provided, it's about $250,000 a unit, depends on the size of the unit. So for example, if we gave them $500,000, it's 2 units that are home-oriented. That means they need to meet that home standard for that 20-year time frame. So it doesn't apply to all of them necessarily. And then underwriting is required. That may be done, in our case, for Taylor Place, it's actually being done by IDA. So we're very fortunate for the fact that they're taking that on for us and we work with them on that. Home ARP was another special funding that came out that has been allocated. So Taylor Place is one of the projects under Home ARP. The other one is Pearl Street 2, which they're working on developing an application for either tax credits or permanent supportive housing from the Illinois Housing Development Authority. And that's specifically for affordable housing. So unlike the regular home where you can use it for home buyer and all those other things, that's not eligible under Home ARP. So there's not that community housing development organization set aside, and they've got a 50% limit on the rentals under this program. One of the main things about this is it really kind of fits in with the workforce housing is the qualifying person. And that's the severely rent burden and low income under 30% person is almost like a de facto homeless individual or household. And so they would qualify for one of the housing units under Home ARP, as well as a person who's formerly homeless would also qualify. And it's the same thing, kind of like the regular home. You provide the subsidy, and then that equals the number of units that apply to it. Again, could also have been used as a loan. In our case, we did the forgivable mortgage for 20 years for both projects. All right, and I'm gonna go a little bit into the tax credits, and I'll try to, this is the state things and whatnot, but I'll try to give a good explanation. And just as we're going through all of these, you may see several of them layered. So for example, like CDBG could be used for the acquisition of the land or property. Then your home's coming in for part of the construction. But this is where the bigger money is that really helps make the projects happen. So what they say is nationally, statistically, workforce housing or affordable housing nationally, the LIHTC or low-income housing tax credit accounts for 90% of it. That's been developed since this program began. And the equity that is used is to make the housing affordable for the first 15 years, and then there's an extended use period for another 15 years for a total of 30. You have the 4% and 9% tax credits. The 9% are the higher ones, the higher equity that would go into the property and are highly competitive. And the states obviously have to opt into these programs. Illinois does. Some states have chosen not to. And so the difference between this being a typical donation that somebody might make versus a wealthy individual or a bank or some kind of organization like that is this is an actual credit against their federal taxes. So if they give $1 million, then it's $1 million credit. Whereas, you know when you donate at an organization and you have $600 worth of items that you've given them, that doesn't have the same effect as a credit does. The state tax credit is a little bit different, so that relates to income tax at the state level. And this relates to donations of property or money. You see a lot of times that somebody will donate land under this type of a situation, and then, obviously they'd want to see that come in as some sort of a housing that would be developed on that eventually. And it's a credit against the Illinois state taxes. And that must exceed $10,000, and of course can be cash, which is always nice. Income limit under that is 60%. We have a similar limit with the tax credits as the home program. All right, and I hope this will play.
Kelly has a question.
Oh, sorry.
So you said that there was a 4% and 9%. Why are there two different rates?
Yeah, it's that's a good question. It's more related to how, like, the bigger kind of donors that can come in with more equity than the other ones. So the 4% is not as competitive, and that's going to bring in less equity. So for a smaller, maybe like a smaller, like 12-unit development, something like that, that may be more applicable than what we saw at Taylor Place with like 50. You're going to want a higher equity coming into it at the beginning like that. So that would be the difference, is that you're really looking at bigger picture versus smaller. And are you able to hit the play button on this one, or will that work? And this is 90 seconds long. I promise this will be 90 seconds. So you can kind of hear a little bit of.
What are low-income housing tax credits? How do they work? Housing tax credits are sold to corporate investors, who in turn use the credits to reduce their tax bills and satisfy their regulatory requirements through their participation in the program. Tax credits are allocated annually to the states by the U.S. Treasury Department. The amount each state receives is based upon its population, subject to a minimum amount. Each state has a housing finance agency that administers that tax credit program for the federal government. Housing developers apply to the state's housing finance agency to receive an award of tax credits. The housing finance agency awards these credits through a highly competitive process. Developments that best meet the needs of the state receive an allocation of credits. Credits then flow to a project owner over a period of 10 years. The tax credits are reserved for projects that are both rent restricted and income restricted. These rent and income restrictions must remain in place for a period of at least 30 years. Housing developers that receive awards of tax credits seek to partner with investors to construct, own, and operate the properties. Investors' equity infusions typically fund 70 to 80% of the project's cost, greatly reducing the amount of debt needed to build the property. This lower debt amount enables property owners to charge lower rents while still paying all operating expenses and debt payments.
It's pretty easy. And I wanted to point out that 10-year mark is commonly when they may refinance at some of these housing, workforce housing type projects. So
And
definitely wanted to make sure
can
I
I
pointed
just
that out.
chime in too a little bit? I mean, I can't say it hard enough or often enough or more emphatically. These projects need those tax credits because those developers can't make mortgage payments because the rents are low. So they have to balance all of that out. So again, we start talking about these projects like they were normal construction projects. They aren't, because those individuals are never recouping the amount of money or the loans that they've had to take out. So just keep that in mind as we start to talk a little bit more about our workforce housing. I'm sorry, Hans, thanks.
Very good way to explain it. All right, let's go back to you, Val. Or is it gonna try to play the next video? I would have wanted to do that. Okay, good, great. Another thing that's a one-time thing that we have right now is $1.8 million that was set aside by the county board for more housing funds, and this is the Treasury ERA2 emergency rental assistance set aside. And this income limit is also 50%, but it does follow the home guidelines, so it looks a little bit like home ARP. The only difference is you can't acquire property with these funds, so the organization or whatever entity comes in for those has to own it already or have a means to get it, like CDBG or some other way. And then ComEd energy efficiency is just exactly how it sounds. This is ComEd providing technical assistance. It comes out to be a monetary value over the course of the project and the reduction in the use of electricity. So commonly we've seen projects come in at about $90,000, $100,000 in total savings over time. So that comes in as part of the underwriting. And their limit is 60% of area median income, so this may be applied to only select units depending on how the project is set up. So they may have units 30, 50, 60, 80%. So it may only apply to some of them. And here's some other projects. Of course, these are more housing authority oriented, but Section 811 is a separate application for additional vouchers. It's also highly competitive, but vouchers can add to the long-term viability of a project as well. So if an individual were to come in with a lower income level, they can actually get to the more fair market rent amounts. And as you were mentioning earlier, Ms. Althoff, that actually alleviates some of that pressure on charging a more affordable, lower 30% rents. So our local housing authority, you may have more than one in a community. We don't, we only have one. And they do have it in their administrative plan, and our housing authority does allocate project-based vouchers to some of our workforce housing projects in the community, which is actually extremely helpful in negotiating that tax credit process, because it demonstrates a long-term viability of that particular project. But the Section 811, part of that is more focused on disabled individuals, and that has a 50% limit. So that would commonly be potentially like disabled veterans, that type of thing that may come into the project. Okay, one of the other things is the Housing Trust Fund. So for probably a handful of years, this was not funded by the federal government, but it's more federal funding to the states. It's for lower income. So 80% of the fund is supposed to be used for rental and 10% is for home buyer. So that a bit resembles how they're proposing to change the overall home program that's been talked about for years now. The Housing Trust Fund is almost more or less like a grant with a 30-year period of affordability. It's, like as I mentioned, not always funded, and we've got a much lower income level here because these are going to be high dollar amounts that come in, and it's going to again reduce the initial costs and ongoing mortgage payments that organization has in order to stay at that 30% limit. So Pearl Street 1, I believe, had some Housing Trust Fund dollars in it. It was one of the first ones in the state. Any other questions?
Yes, you mentioned emergency rental.
Yes.
So there is money available for maybe someone who is homeless and living out of their car or whatever. If there is really get in a crunch, there is money available for emergency rentals.
There will be on October 17th when these allocations you just put through are approved. So in particular, people that are subject to a potential eviction working at the courthouse. So the last county board meeting, Consumer Credit Counseling came in and made a public comment about that, about how many more cases they're seeing come in. And as long as they haven't had more than 18 months of assistance under the ERA programs, the state or the county, they could qualify for assistance. So Consumer Credit was very willing to accept funds in order to assist those county residents that might otherwise be affected.
Okay, so as long as they haven't had 18 months of assistance already.
Correct, and then the 50% area median income.
Hans, is that similar to the HPRP money? Or do we
Similar.
have housing prevention, rapid rehousing money? So it's to be used in an emergency, right? When someone is like in a shelter, or do we have that in the county?
So these funds have been used that way. So Home of the Sparrow has been using them in that way. So when they've had a homeless individual come or household come into the program, if it's definitely a situation where like a year of time will assist that resident, they've been able to use it in very similar manner to HPRP.
But we're out of that money right now.
We are not. So we were
Okay,
giving
so
them
I
more.
had a call. A woman tried to get into the Turning Point shelter. She was 3 weeks past the initial violent episode. I'm really not sure why she was turned away. I didn't follow up. But she did go to Home of the Sparrow, who said they will only take people from the shelter who are in the Pioneer shelter. So she was doubled up. The family was telling her she had to leave with the baby, and she didn't want to go to the PAD shelter. And so nobody referred her to this money. Is
Right.
that, how does,
And I can explain that actually, is that their first allocation that they directly received was $250,000, and that's all been obligated already, which is the reason we came back for another $100,000 for them. But there still remains more funds, and they'll sort of play it by ear to see where that's gonna go. We got back $375,000 from the Housing Authority that had been doing the bulk of this project over time. And this is only 200 of it, well, not only, but this is 200,000 of that with 175 just at the bank across the street. So we can still allocate that later. That has to be rental assistance in some fashion.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Alto?
It's a dumb question, maybe. If the federal shutdown occurs, which it looks like it might for a period of time, is that gonna affect any fund flow through or anything for us?
No, it's a very good question, and no, and especially the EZRA funds, because we have them in the bank. But we have been through the previous shutdown. We were able to still make draws on ELOCs and IDIS systems that for CDBG home and continuing care projects. So those still function even with the shutdown. We actually were concerned about that when we had the last shutdown.
Right,
So hopefully they work things out, but I don't know. So,
good to know, thank you, appreciate it.
All right, any other questions for Hans? Well, thank you for coming and presenting that. It's very
I just again say for the body, it's extraordinarily important that we don't compare the normal cost of construction for houses and multifamily and everything else to these kinds of projects, because we're not comparing an apple to an apple. We're not even comparing a Granny Smith apple to a Macintosh apple. I mean, it's a whole total different fruit. So I just want everybody to kind of sort of remember that as we.
And I think when Richard came, I
Right.
think he very clearly said to us, projects targeting workforce housing cannot have a mortgage component attached to them. They don't work. They're too expensive. They can't keep rents low. And so in order to keep the rents manageable, this multi-layer funding, it has to be in place. Otherwise, the project will not work. And I think it's hard for people who look at acquisition to understand that it takes, and I don't know if Hans said it, but from conception to move-in, it takes 3 to 4 years to completely move up every step, every rank of the way. So even if tomorrow we got a boatload of money, we would not provide housing for probably 4 years in a project, right? That's what Richard said, so.
It takes that long for them to put all of that lasagna financing in order for them to go forward.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Can we get a copy of that presentation?
Yes, that's what I was thinking, Kelly. Thank you for asking.
We've got an hour. Can I make a couple more points?
No, Peter. Can I ask, can we roll on then to the workforce housing report?
why
So
don't
we can
we-
just build on this, if that's okay.
No,
you can't.
Workforce housing report, and I
No, Peter, finish what you were saying, and I was just gonna roll
Well,
on what you were
on
gonna
the
say.
subject of homelessness, Hans and I did visit the PAD site Tuesday afternoon, along with Shaylin and our public safety social worker group and Chief Morosky. And they were, Frank Samuel and his team, and Shaylin went as well. And the reason why we brought Shaylin and law enforcement is we're trying, the PAD site has received some criticism for not accepting people in the off hours. They want to process people, they want to screen people, they don't want to introduce new bodies into the sleeping quarters at 2 in the morning. So there's a myriad of reasons why it's a challenge, but at the same time, it's supposed to be a 24/7 shelter. So bridging that gap is kind of what we had to challenge them to do, because they're getting federal money that says they're a 24/7 shelter. They are upping their staffing. They haven't done it yet, but they've got a plan in place now to using hotel vouchers and never turning anybody away, never not answering the door when an officer brings somebody in at 2 in the morning. We're hopeful that plan can get up and running soon. They're not quite there yet, but it looks like a very solid plan. So we talked through that. We're going to meet with them again October 18th or thereabouts, around then, and hopefully they're making progress. So I just wanted to report on it. It is going to take a little bit more money. Hans is finding them some different grants to go after, but it is a step in the right direction. The shelter itself is now, I think, averaging about 55 bodies a night, so they're certainly up over and getting closer to their 70 capacity and over the 30-some that they were doing and kind of falling back on COVID. So that it's good news, bad news, I guess, on there. So I wanted to update you on that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If somebody knocks on their door at 2 in the morning versus a police officer dropping them off, will they let them in?
No.
But it's a public safety issue. I
Yeah,
mean, you have to screen them. What happens if you're letting somebody in with prior records? I mean, your obligation is the safety of the people that have already.
There's criminal record, there's sobriety, there's criminal history, there's meeting the true federal definition of homelessness. There's a lot of things that whole voucher program allows them a day or two to do that screening or find other alternatives.
So I was working yesterday at work at our church, and a gentleman came in and he asked the church for money to help tide him over a couple days at the hotel. Where would I send him if he's asking the church? I mean, would I send him to PADS? Would I send him to the county?
I think PADS, yeah. They have an existing hotel voucher program.
They do, okay.
Yeah, but if you get someone in the middle of the night, because I got a call for someone in the middle of the night that was at Jewel in the vestibule area, had nowhere to go. And this person called me because they knew that I was involved with Compassion for Campers. I called Compassion for Campers. They did not have any emergency money for a hotel. So I paid out of pocket for one night at a hotel, and the person who called me paid for the second night. We figured it would take us 2 nights for her in the hotel to get everything together with PADS, and it did. It did take that, but
Well, I think that's more a matter of people don't know where to refer rather than the referral's not
Right.
there. So it is very common practice. Shelters lock their doors from 7 to 7. They don't take people off the street at night. I mean, in Rockford, you couldn't, 7:05, you couldn't get in.
Yeah.
That was just the way it was. However, we had a voucher system there that we could put somebody in a hotel until the morning at 7, when they then met with, or 2 nights, if they needed 2 nights or 3 nights, we could do that. And that's pretty across the country, I'll tell you, for some of the reasons that you mentioned, but also because people are settling in and it's too disruptive to bring people into
So is there any place I could call then to
Well, I
pay
would
for
think-
those 2 nights in the hotel rather than for us paying it out of?
Yeah, I think you could have called Pat's if they have a shelter, or who's the point person?
Pads.
Pat's.
Yeah.
So now you know, call Pat's. And if, you know, Pat's.
But I'm with the caveat that the program isn't up and running yet.
Well, then who do we call in the interim?
I would still call Pads.
Great.
But I'm just saying, that they're not gonna be staffed necessarily to answer that at 2 in.
That's.
At this point.
Yeah, but Peter, that person still needs to be,
I appreciate that.
yeah, I know
And local
that.
law enforcement has their own resources that they're calling on. And so that's we expect, and that's why we're engaging with the sheriff's office, engaging with Shaylin. Shaylin and I are meeting with the village managers in the middle of October. We're gonna be communicating that this is a new tool that's gonna be available. And then we're gonna have a follow-up meeting with the PAD staff and all of the police chiefs as we move into November to talk about the new resource. But it isn't there entirely yet. And like everyone else, it's staffing. They can't,
Well, and-
they had an interview this week. Hopefully it went well. I haven't followed up.
It's hard work.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not an easy, bagging a grocery store job. It's hard work.
Well, in Rockford, the city gave the chaplains division $20,000 a year. We were the point of entry for people who came to the shelter after 7 o'clock. Because there was always a chaplain on call with a vehicle, a city vehicle to use, not their own, to transport. So we did that. And they gave us money every year. They refilled that hole, and that's what we did. Here, I would expect that same kind of transport's provided. We know who's gonna do it. You make the phone call, this is going to happen. That would be my expectation.
That's great.
So building on that, there's been, the past few years, there's been that cold weather assistance where we've raised money to help people put in hotels when it's under 20, correct? Is there any plan for what's happening in the winter this year?
The hotel voucher program.
But raising money, I mean, who's gonna fund it? Because I know we've raised money through churches before, and Compassion for Campers gave money. And it was going through, not Catholic Charities, what's a diocese out of Rockford. Anyway, so how is that gonna work this year?
My understanding, it's gonna be the same program.
Is PADS involved in that too? Okay.
Yeah, and part of, I can add a little too, that there's new COC funding that came in this year from the state that began retroactively to July 1 of about $840,000, and a part of that, about $100,000 of that is shelter diversion. And part of the fund that went to Pioneer is actually for that purpose.
And again, local law enforcement is gonna be the gateway, for those people we find in the middle of the night.
And that's in alignment with the single point of entry theory, correct?
Correct, and they're the single point.
Yeah, because it seemed like there were a bunch of different entry
Well,
points, so
yeah.
this is good.
It's great theory.
I have
Wait,
one,
stop the
one other quick topic, on the subject of the government shutdown, which is of course looming. I'm glad to hear it won't impact Hans immediately. It will impact Workforce Network pretty promptly. 20 days, give or take, is kind of what we're hearing. So there's a scenario where we come to the October board meeting where we may have to make a decision, are we gonna, float Workforce some money to continue operations? We've done that one other time, but that is certainly something to keep on the radar and something that could show up on an October agenda.
Childcare.
We had talked about a resolution just to preempt that for this meeting, but at that time, while we're developing the agenda, we weren't sure where it was going. Obviously, today, we have a little better sense that it's going to happen. So that resolution, which in essence would be an interfund loan from general fund, I would presume, to Workforce Network for a short period of time, may appear at maybe finance and audit, or at least at your regular meeting, just to ensure that they would have funds to operate for whatever period we determine. There is a call this afternoon with DCEO, which is the state that manages Obviously, the federal funding comes into the state, and the state distributes it to a workforce network. And we're gonna get a better sense on how that will work. So we're looking forward to that call, a little bit more information on what the state is willing to do as far as obligating certain funds.
Will you let me know what happens on that call?
Yeah, in fact,
I think you'll let all of us know.
Yeah, I'm the liaison of the workforce, that's why.
I know,
Do you know have they been able to tap into their first quarter?
I'm sorry?
Have they been able to tap into their first quarter money that, remember at the meeting they said?
They have, actually. So after a follow-up call, Jeff was pretty proud of this. He had called up the DCO and said, we have this money, it hasn't been obligated yet. So when he checked after the phone call and turned the switch on, so they do have their money. I'll send you the information then regarding this call for this afternoon.
Is there any childcare funding that, besides, do we have subsidized childcare in this county anyplace? It just struck me, I have no idea.
It's an organization by the name of 4Cs, and that organization, they applied for assistance with childcare.
Four Cs.
Particularly in getting back to work.
And are they're going to be impacted by the shutdown?
I think they're a pass-through of the state, so that would be a good question. I can find that out for you.
Okay. Pam or Lou, do you have anything to add?
I do.
from
Can
your-
I go?
Yep.
Okay, number one, we've confirmed a visit, and if you're interested, I invite you. November 20th, not yet sure where, probably still MCEDC, 11 o'clock. The director of IDA is coming to McHenry County and doing a formal presentation on how the housing program at the state level works, funding, tax credits, the whole 9 yards. So it's just kind of another building block on top of what you saw today. So again, I invite any of you who are interested. She probably will do about a 20-minute, it's Ms. Faust. She'll probably do a 20-minute presentation and then take about 20 minutes of questioning. So if you're interested, please feel free to join us. But let us know, so if we're providing lunch or someone is, we can do that. Also, just to get, so you have a kind of a concept, things are kind of coming together, and we're going to work on kind of a template outline of the white paper that we're going to be presenting all of you. But again, I stress, what we've done is workforce housing is really trying to provide housing for people who are making between $20 and $25 an hour, which is 40 to maybe 50,000, maybe a little higher than that, per year salary. And again, we're talking about a lot of people like, teachers and firefighters, and who, when they come in, are making bare minimum. So that's the kind of thing that we're actually addressing. And I think, and then we did do kind of, and I wanted to build on what Hans was talking about. We actually had a presentation from people who have land bank programs, who also do kind of an affordable housing program, and they do 4 to 5 houses a year. That's it. So when we're talking more about, a quantity of homes as opposed to, land banking, which only gives you very minimal access. So I just kind of wanted to also identify that huge difference. Great programs, just, again, your end result is very infinitesimal.
Yeah, I think what we're learning is there are many different pieces to the workforce housing puzzle. Like there isn't one single way to go, like the land bank is one thing. And what Habitat Humanity did in Crystal Lake is another thing. But thinking that we're gonna come down to a developer's, I just think we're looking at something different. We did meet with municipalities. Came last month, that was very enlightening, very interesting.
They all recognize the need.
Yeah.
Every single one of them indicated that they have internal programs that they're trying to promote to address the absolute need to provide that kind of housing for people who provide those services to us here in McHenry County, but live outside the county because they can't afford anything here.
Yeah.
So I thought that was eye-opening too. And then the other part is the information that Hans provided us too. I want you to keep in the back of your head that CMAP is going to apply for grant dollars with many of the collar counties. And McHenry County obviously would participate in part of that. And there would be a match component. It can be done not necessarily with dollars, but with services. But I want you to keep that in mind because maybe it will be dollars. And I think it's definitely worthwhile to be incorporated into that opportunity. Yanni?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Well, I
Thank
want to
you.
thank both of you for keeping me in the loop on everything and having reports every month and
We have a great
looking into all
group
this.
of
Yeah.
the Board of Workforce members. They're very dug in and dedicated, do a lot of hard work, come to the meetings prepared. It's a great group.
But we're also very cognizant that our structure is a little bit different, and that's why we report to you on a regular basis and report, again, to the chairman as well. So you guys have a good handle of what we're doing and we stay inside our lane.
Great. Well, with that, we've got one more under reports. There's a discussion and direction on the older adult home modification grants. And that's from HUD.
So this has been quite a whirlwind here. Again, for the record, Hans Block, Community Development Administrator. And so at our Senior Services Grant Commission meeting in July, a number of proposals were received, and one was from Habitat for Humanity. With the funding for the Senior Services Grant Program being stagnant for many years, it was very difficult. Decisions had to be made about allowing new applicants to come in. And so coincidentally, in the middle of September, this funding notice that comes out every 3 years came out from HUD, and it's the Older Adults Home Modification Program. It's a means by which we can allow seniors, elderly, and older adults to maintain their housing and maintain that affordability. So they may own their houses outright, but they can no longer traverse upstairs to go to their bedrooms and things. So this has been a common project that Habitat's done for years with our community development block grant funds. I think it'd be an excellent opportunity for us to pursue this or look into it. We have a very limited time frame, of course, as usual. It's like a month to get everything done. I'm right in the middle of that month right now. But they could be shut down, who knows? So we'll find out when the new application date is, I guess. But there's a pre-application portion of that, and that's due like October 16th. And so our plan would be to pursue this if the committee gives the blessing to allow us to look into this. But this is a way to look at how do we preserve the Senior Services Grant Fund for more services while also being able to address what Habitat's intentions were in looking for Senior Services Grant funds. So kind of a win-win if we're able to bring in alternate funds to cover those projects, and especially considering our population has aged since the last census. But I think this is very much needed.
I have no question. I wanted to go back to the senior services grant thing because I forgot to say something. But
Go ahead.
If there are any
Well,
questions for Hans,
I actually
this
did.
topic.
Is there like a set amount that you apply for?
A minimum, it's a 3-year grant, a minimum is $500,000. And so it would involve some healthcare component to it, occupational therapy, along with determining a home modification that's appropriate for that client's situation, that household situation. So individuals enrolled in the project need to be age 62 and over, at least one person in the household, and income limit 80% here.
And I'll just add a little bit narrative. One comment we heard during other presentations is the growing need for that type of a service and not having any funds to provide the providers to give them access to being able to answer the need. So it was, again, eye-opening for me. Small little things and no funds. Board Member Kopa was leading that charge, so.
Do we need a motion?
I think it's just direction from.
Okay. Oh, go for
Consensus
it.
to go forward?
Yeah,
Okay.
yep.
Go do the work.
Great, thank you, I appreciate it.
And I apologize. I want to explain, during the senior services grant presentations, it became abundantly apparent that one of the areas that is of great need is transportation. You know, the mission is to keep seniors in their homes. Transportation obviously is a big priority. You can't stay in your home if you can't get places. The townships have had a past history of coming to the Grant Commission for additional funds for the bus programs, particularly in the northeastern quadrant of the county, which, you know, Hebron, Harvard, Spring Grove, Richmond, McHenry. And we had a very detailed, honest conversation about how difficult it is with only $1.6 million to provide to individuals applicants who are asking for the grant money, to give money to another taxing body, even though we value the service because it's unusual and it fills a void. So what we did is we created, if you'll look, a contingency fund. So there's $40,000 in a contingency fund that if we cannot collaboratively work with all of the townships and our McDoc programs and maybe even PACE to find maybe another pot of money or a way to continue to provide those services but more efficiently rather than through the individual townships. And there has been some progress and conversations ongoing about that. So we put money in a contingency fund. If we can't find the solution to be incorporated in this budget cycle and for 2024, that money will be dispersed back to the townships to continue those programs. If we can find a better solution for that, that money will have another Senior Services Commission meeting. That $40,000 will then be dispersed amongst the applicants who won grant monies. And so we'll just figure out where that extra money goes. I wanted to explain that. So we didn't want to leave the townships high and dry, but we also are trying to find something that obviously is much more efficient and rolls in with transportation programs we already provide at the county, and we spend huge amounts of money doing that. So we're going to try and figure that out.
Perfect.
Sorry, forgot to say that.
Thank you. Okay, so I feel like we have enough going on in future topics to put anything else on our plate. Y'all agree? Yeah, good with that? Okay, so I don't see any need for executive session, so can I get
Motion to adjourn.
Ms. Althoff, second by Mr. Burton?